Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good evening, I guess. Good evening. It's evening. Can you hear me at the back, Jane? I'm just going to ask that everybody grab a seat. We're going to get started, if that's all right. I'd like to welcome you to Stavely, Alberta's Solutions for a New Alberta, brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project. We're a group of grassroots Albertans with no politicians at our table, committed to inspiring, advocating, and educating all Albertans on how we can achieve freedom and prosperity through independence. We're just a group of regular people, just like everybody else in this room. This project was born about a year ago. It was in May of 2021. A group of very tired Albertans met in an oil field shop in Nisku, and they hashed out a few things. And from that discussion about top-down, corrupt, tyrannical governments meddling in their affairs, they decided that they would do something about it, and they created the Alberta Prosperity Project. How many of you have been to one of these events before? Alberta Prosperity Project. Wow, great. How many of you brought 2 friends with you today? Nobody? 2 friends. You guys got to work on that a little bit.
We have no friends. Nobody likes us.
I'm glad you're here anyways. I'm excited that you've come to join us this evening to learn about solutions for a new Alberta. And I'd just like to invite our friend Jeff Enfield to open the evening with a prayer.
Actually, Sharon said not a long prayer. She actually has a shepherd's crook back there somewhere. So to each one of you here this evening, it's good to be here. This is my first one of these. And some very powerful words that someone shared me, they're not my own, is to really move forward, you need to recognize that I'm powerless to deal with the problem that I'm facing. And I think we recognize that we would say that we are powerless if we don't at least consider thinking differently. So it's great to see all of you here tonight who are willing to think differently and even pray differently for the province of Alberta. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your care for each one of us here. And Father, a great prayer that a friend shared with me a number of years ago simply was this: help me, help me, help me. In Jesus' name, amen. So Father, I pray that we would be seeking your help, that you provide wisdom and direction for this province and each person in it. That Father, you would bring Albertans together, even if they may be of differing opinions, so that Father, we can talk and care and even be willing to serve one another. So some time ago, Father, you know that whether it was praying for government or personal situations, you shared this prayer with me, that if it is God honoring, if it is in your will, if it is good for others, that I would pray that it would be protected by you and would come to success. And if there's anything, Father, that is not of your will or honoring to you or good for others, that I started praying with your direction to pray that you would throw confusion into the midst of it and for its failure. So, Father, for that which is good and honoring to you, we pray for your protection and success, including the discussion here this evening. If this is indeed good for Alberta, Father, honoring to you and good for its people, I pray, Father, your protection over it and for its success. And if it's not, well, the same thing, that it would not succeed. But I think many believe here that this is good and would be God honoring. So would you guide this evening, bring wisdom to those who are presenting, and Father, would you bring the people of Alberta together? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
That's the next one.
Thanks, Kevin. His name's Jeff, actually. I called it Kevin. I don't know if there's even a Kevin here.
Here, it's Kevin.
Sorry about that. And we're live. So Plus, he called me Sharon, so it's fair. My name is Shannon, okay?
Well, right.
My name is Shannon Packham. I'm from Patricia, Alberta, and I am a teacher. I have not been in a classroom since the end of February 2020 because I refused to take part in the abuse of students. That was the end of teaching for me, but I discovered that day that you can never be afraid to stand up for what you believe in, even if you're standing alone. And as I look around here today, I know that I'm not alone. I'm also learning to trust that there is a future waiting for all of us that is beyond what any of us might be able to grasp at this moment. After these presentations, you'll be able to understand what is waiting for all of us and all of the things that we can have. So this is how the event works. We have guest speakers, they do a presentation, and then we have a question and answer period, and we have a break, and then we have more speakers, and then you all buy a membership, and then you go home. That's kind of how it works. So as you came in, you passed the membership table. We've got a group of volunteers at the membership table. There's also a petition back there. Dennis will touch on that a little bit later. We've got merchandise at the back as well and snacks at the side. I need to point out that the washrooms are up. There's a set of washrooms at the back and also one just right here. And their exits are marked with exit signs. Cool how that works. So we have memberships. I was just told today that the board decided that they would have memberships for anybody under 21, $5 membership for 3 years. There's $10 or sorry, $20 membership is for 1 year, 30 for 2, and 40 for 3. Our merchandise is at the back. T-shirts are $20, hats are $40, and the stickers are 10. So let's get started. First thing you do me a favor. Everybody has a cell phone in here, right? Yes. Okay, so I would like for you to go to our Facebook page, find the live stream that we've got going on here, like the live stream, share the live stream, and tag a couple of friends, and then turn your cell phone off and put it in your pocket. So I said we're going to have a question and answer period. At the back table when you came in, there's little index cards. They look like this. You write your questions on there. I already have 5 actually, so somebody came prepared. Write your questions on there. I'll read them. The experts will answer them, and then we'll move along. Okay, are you ready? Have you heard me talking enough already?
No.
Okay. Our first guest is a resident of Edmonton, educated over 17 years at the universities of Alberta, McGill, and Stanford. He is a recently retired 30-year heart and lung surgeon and critical care specialist. He is known as the North American pioneer of heart and lung transplants, implementing the first heart and lung transplant program in Western Canada, performing the first heart transplant in 1985 and the first combined heart and both lungs in 1986. The success of his programs grew to be the largest and most successful in Canada and one of the largest programs in North America. He has been recognized with numerous awards in excellence in medicine as well as in community service. He is an exceptional community leader and a brilliant mind, and he has always advocated for the overall health and well-being of the people. He is a key driver of the Alberta Prosperity Project as our CEO. And on top of all that, he is an individual who had tremendous influence in the eras of Premier Hnidey, Klein, and Stelmach. He is here today to talk to us about Alberta's prosperity and freedom through independence. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Dennis Modry.
Thank you, Lori.
raise your temperature a little bit. Thank you very much, folks, for coming out tonight. Listening to Shannon, I'm starting to believe some of the things she said about me. But one of the things that is true, over my career, I had the privilege of operating on over 7,000 people. And that was incredibly rewarding. But then I thought I was going to retire a few years ago. And then all of this business that's been happening to us motivated me to think, well, if I could save a person, maybe I can work and help to save a province. So here I am today. Now, is anybody here enjoying the high gas prices? So I got to tell you a story. Some of you probably heard this already, but we had an event a few weeks ago on Medicine Hat. My wife and I drove in, and I was short of gas, and so we pulled into the Shell and went to the pump and didn't have a card reader. So I went inside and I said to the clerk behind plexiglass, amazing. And I said to him, the price of gas is a little high, but I'll take $10,000 in pump number 2. And he looked at me and deadpan. He said, would that be regular or V-power? It's a true story, actually. I just thought it was funny. I like to share it. So how many people here are pleased with the performance of our federal government?
I better put my hand down. Yeah, I just a minute.
About the performance of the Prime Minister. Some of you may have seen the Angus Reid survey reported on January the 4th that 73% of Albertans are disillusioned with the federal government. I would think it's probably closer to 100% if they continue polling.
Yeah.
What about the performance of our provincial government? How many people are pleased with the performance of our provincial government? It's okay, if anybody wants to raise their hand. No, not so much. So what does that tell you? It tells me, and it should tell all of you, that we're not very happy about government. And we're not happy about government for a lot of reasons. And some of those reasons might be corruption, fiscal mismanagement, saying one thing and doing something else, lying. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that from now on I can't believe you. Isn't that the case the way we feel about government these days?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. What about your freedoms and prosperity? Anybody here concerned about your freedoms, your individual freedoms and prosperity? Pretty much why you're here tonight. By the way, freedom for truckers. Yep. Prosperity. So there was another poll reported, I believe on January the 14th, that 87% of Albertans polled in an Angus Reid survey are also concerned about the cost of living and inflation, i.e. they're concerned about their prosperity, ability to pay the bills. And a few months prior to that, on November the 11th, a fellow by the name of Jack Mintz, the chair of public policy at the University of Calgary, who's advised many governments over the years, indicated that ending our oil and gas industry would result in a 1/3 reduction in the average income of Albertans. How does that sit with you folks? Not very well. Well, we truly are facing an existential threat to our very way of life, to our individual freedoms and rights, and an economic threat to each and every one of us if we do nothing. And it's not often that we know the future, but if you've read anything about the Great Reset, you should be very concerned because the future portends a much worse future for all of us. But I'm here today to tell you that if we come together for common cause and do something unique, something that's never been done before in this province, the future could be incredibly brilliant for all of us. And so what is that? Well, that's what the Alberta Prosperity Project is all about. What we are aiming to do is unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect their interests, their individual freedoms and rights, and their prosperity and their self-determination by enabling Alberta to chart a new path forward. Now, what does a new path forward look like? And we're going to get to that in a few minutes. But first, let's look at where we are right now with respect to freedoms and prosperity. How many people here would like freedom from being overgoverned, overregulated, and overtaxed?
Everybody.
What about freedom from wokeness, cancel culture, critical race theory? And what about freedom from the Great Reset for those of you who understand what it is?
Yes.
And I already know your feeling about corruption. You'd like freedom from that as well. Look at the freedoms that we've lost. We still do not have freedom of speech. Look at the people that are still getting canceled out there. You can't have a sensible conversation with somebody who may disagree with you because they then conclude that you must be racist because you don't agree with them. You have a different perspective on something. And what about freedom for religion? Look at how that's been lost. What about freedom of movement? We still don't have that fully yet, do we? And what about something really important as well? How many people here would like freedom to own things and enjoy them? How many people here own their property without a mortgage? Congratulations. But here's the thing. If you think you own your property, just don't pay your property taxes and you'll find out who owns it. So the point is we don't really even have property rights. But one of the most important freedoms that we've lost is the freedom for families to be the moral, cultural, and spiritual pillar to pass on principles, values, responsibility, accountability, a work ethic, critical thinking. It's been usurped by a socialist education system, and that needs to change and go back to you people. You're responsible for your kids, and your kids will be responsible for their kids. Well, that's a little bit about freedom. Let's think about the Great Reset. Now, I know many people know about it, but I just want to make a couple of key points. So you know that it's a highly influential movement by the global elites of the World Economic Forum and the United Nations under a contract called Agenda 2030 to reset the global economy and to restructure how society operates using banks, governance agencies, and environmental, social, and governance metrics to control billions of people in everything they do. And so how will it work? Well, you'll have a digital ID to start with. There will be a digital currency. And there will be a social credit score, which determines the permissions that you have to do anything. So you will be pinned, cataloged, categorized, tracked, and controlled in everything that you do. They will have the ability to turn your account off, your bank account. They will have the ability to, when you go to buy groceries, to say, well, no, you bought steaks 2 months ago. You can't have steaks again. We're in a plant-based society now. How does that sit with you? And as Klaus Schwab said, you owe nothing and be happy. Please raise your hand if you agree that if you owe nothing, you will be happy. Can I see any hands out there? No, obviously. Question is then, what are you prepared to do about it? Let's look at prosperity now from the perspective of two things: our energy industry and confiscatory tax policy, taxation. So our energy industry, as you know, Alberta is blessed to have one of the world's largest oil resources, number 3. We have 97.3, 98% of all of the oil in Alberta, in Canada. 98% of all the oil in Canada is in Alberta, and the majority of gas is as well. So we're blessed. But what does the federal government want to do? They want to, on 2030, by 2030, they want a 42% reduction in our productivity, in our oil productivity. And of course, ended by 2050. We're the tip of the spear right now of the World Economic Forum, the United Nations. We're first in line to be eliminated. Kind of feels like we're on the firing line. Now, at the same time, though, they're going to continue importing oil from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, Russia, and who knows where else. Regions that don't have the same environmental and social standards that we do. How does that make sense? You know, the whole climate, I was at a conference today called Freedom Talk. I was listening to some very bright people talk about climate, but I've been thinking about this for a long time as well. When you look at evidence and you look at a scientific article, the way you understand whether it's valid or not is you look at the methodology first. And if the methodology is not valid, then the article, the conclusions cannot be relied on. It's really that simple. Now, Alberta, of course, is vilified because of climate issues. Yet we only produce 0.15% of the world's CO2 production. Only from fossil fuel use and coal, etc. 0.15%. But we have a massive carbon sink of, 300 plus billion trees and muskeg and agricultural lands that soak up that CO2. CO2, is plant food. The more CO2, the more plants thrive. It's really that simple. CO2 is good. It is not bad at all. It's carbon. And carbon is the basis of every living creature on this earth. Now, but you try and talk to an eco-alarmist or an environmental radical and explain to them, for example, that you could take a gas plant or a solar or a coal plant that sits on 4 acres of property, just 4 acres of property produces X amount of energy. To replace that energy by a wind farm, you need to put wind turbines on 2,500 acres. How does that make ecological sense? And I don't think the birds like it very much either. And none of that is biodegradable. Yet, you need the oil and gas industry to create wind turbines and to keep them operational. That's the same thing with solar panels. To keep them operational, but to build them in the first place. Now, one of the things I find fascinating is I'll just pose this question. So for those of you who have been at a previous presentation, don't answer, but I want to see what everybody else says. And just shout out an answer. How many products do you think come from a single barrel of oil? Somebody from Blackie once said all of them, and I thought that was the best answer I've heard yet. The reality is it's over 6,000 products emanate from a barrel of oil. Everything from the roads that we drive on to contact lenses, to makeup, to clothes that you wear, to that which wraps electrical cables, medications such as Tylenol and aspirin, and anesthetic agents as well. So I like to tell the story about without anesthetic agents, we go back to the surgeon says, here's a couple of shots of whiskey. Bite on this bullet because this is going to hurt. No, we would literally go back to the Stone Age without the oil and gas industry, and I can assure you it's never going away. Now, one of the things that I'd like you to think about when you're talking to someone who is really concerned about the climate is ask them to give you their cell phone or their laptop or their iPad say you can't have it. Why can't I have it? Well, it comes from the oil and gas industry. You don't like the oil and gas industry. See how far that goes with them. But what you really want to do is engage with them to try to get them to understand. It's not easy to do these days because a lot of people have cognitive dissonance. They think they know everything and they're not willing to listen to an alternate perspective.
And know nothing.
Try and engage with them anyhow. And here's something. Not one apocalyptic climate prediction in 100 years has ever occurred. Actually, I just learned something today. 1864 was the first climate alarm. From 1864 to now, not one climate prediction has ever occurred. So, what's the song? When will we ever learn? Well, obviously, a lot of people can't ever learn, but keep trying. Here's another thing that I think is quite fascinating. People know who Steve Allen is. Right. Did you read his report? It's 700 pages. Just take you an hour. You're a fast reader. I can tell you wear glasses. Any case, the beauty of that report is it was, well, not the beauty, but it was commissioned by the provincial government to look at foreign spending to prevent the development and transport of our natural resources. And between 2003 and 2019, are you ready for this? $1.3 billion was spent to prevent the development and transport of our natural resources. Now, why did this occur? Well, one of the reasons it occurred was because it all started. Do you guys know how the climate argument started? I mean, the current mantra of climate change being related to carbon emissions. It started with Maurice Strong, who is a billionaire oilman out of Winnipeg. And then he recruited George Soros, and they got involved with the United Nations, and Maurice Strong had a very prominent position. And that's how it started. But the interesting thing is that when you look at where the funding comes from to prevent the development and transport of our natural resources, it comes from our federal government. It comes from other provinces. And where does that funding go? It goes to the Tax Foundation. It goes to the Suzuki Foundation. It goes to these organizations that are absolutely ideologically against the oil and gas industry. In addition, think about competition now. Other countries and other oil and gas businesses, corporations in other countries, look at Alberta as a competitor. And they see that the United Nations and the World Economic Forum is beating down on Alberta. And so they fund these organizations because that gives them a competitive advantage. They sell more oil, more gas, and at a higher price. They benefit, we lose. That's how competition can sometimes work. But in this case, it's corrupted competition because our own people, our own federal government won't protect us, and our own provincial government won't protect us. So what are we going to do? Well, before we go on to that, I want to tell you something else. How many people here know that federally we are taxed something in the order of $55 to $60 billion a year? That's what leaves this province. We get back 27. Think about that. Think about this. For every dollar of a product or a service that's provided by private enterprise, to get that same product or service from a government organization, it costs $3 rather than $1 from private enterprise. That's how inefficient government is. But think about that. We overfund our pension plan by $3 billion a year. Since 1965, Alberta has contributed nearly $700 billion to Ottawa to be redistributed for virtue signaling causes around the world or other regions in Canada, and Alberta has not received $1 of that 700 billion. Not one. What's important to understand here now is what do we do about this? Where do we go from here? Well, we have fundamentally three options. One is do nothing and just see what happens. And I kind of liken do nothing as the metaphor of a canoe on the Niagara River, and you're the inhabitants of that canoe, and you know which way that canoe is headed. And eventually you're going to hear the rush of the falls. And at some point you have an opportunity to paddle like crazy and get to the sideline. At another point, it's too late, and you're going over the falls into the abyss of the hell of the Great Reset. Anybody here, raise your hand if that's the direction you want to go. So if that's not the direction that you want to go, what are you prepared to do? Now, like I said, there are three options, and here are the other two. One is we can try and fix Alberta's circumstances within Confederation. Have control of our own wealth, control of our own social programs, but we still remain part of Canada. And the other option is for Alberta to chart a new path forward as an independent sovereign nation. So let me see from this audience, how many people would like Alberta to remain in Canada, but have much more control over its own affairs and its own wealth? Raise your hand. Okay, so it's about maybe 10 to 12%. How many people would like Alberta to get out of Dodge? Right, okay. Now, it's really important to understand these two paradigms because that reflects, to an extent, Alberta as it is right now, except that I would suggest to you that there are more people in Alberta right now. Probably maybe 40% of Albertans would prefer Alberta to stay in Confederation with a better deal. And we know from an October 19th mainstream research poll that 47% of decided voters would like Alberta to get out of Canada. Now, how do we bring these two paradigms together? First of all, you need to understand that it's not possible to fix Alberta's circumstances within Confederation. And it's not possible for Alberta to chart a new path forward. And let me explain why, first of all, why we can't fix Alberta's circumstances in Confederation. And in order to understand this, we're going to use the metaphor of AntiEqualization as a metaphor for ending any egregious program that harms Alberta, that harms each and every one of you. And we're going to look at this through the lens of history and the structural electoral imbalance and the 5 hurdles to change the Constitution. But I'm going to be very brief on the history. I'm just going to make one key point. Actually, 2. I could make 10, but I'll just make a couple. The fix was in 1904. Now, Alberta became a province in 1905, September 1, 1905, thanks to the efforts of Clifford Sifton, who was the Minister of the Interior in the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier. So when I say the fix was in, it was in because this is what he said in 1904. He said, we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire. Now, Canadian patriots at that time were the people living in the regions of Quebec and Ontario. We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories. Hang on a sec, I didn't get that quite right. We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies, I forgot to tell you, the great trade of the prairies is Alberta as well. That the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to our prosperity. No mention of the prosperity of Alberta. So we started as a colony in 1905. We continue as a colony in 2022. And we continue to be pillaged and plundered of our wealth for the benefit of the East. And here's the important thing to understand about history. Not one federal government and not one provincial government has ever protected Alberta's interests, our self-determination, our individual freedoms and rights, or our prosperity. Not one. I want you to think about that. And think about whether or not some future government, provincial or federal, can do that, since it hasn't happened in 116 years. So, just knowing that little bit of history, do you think we can end equalization? Okay. Now, does anybody here think it's possible to end equalization? Do you think it's possible to end equalization? Okay, so let's look at the next hurdle. That's the structural electoral imbalance. So most of you will know that we don't have representation by population. So Prince Edward Island elects one MP for every 40,000 population. Alberta elects one MP for every 130,000 population. Quebec, one for every 108,000 population. So, and it's so better in the Senate. We're disproportionately underrepresented in the Senate as well. And what it means is that every federal election will be decided by voter-rich Quebec and Ontario. And it doesn't matter the party in power, be it conservative or liberal, it does not matter. In order to be elected and in order to remain in power, you have got to pander to the wishes of Quebec and Ontario at Alberta's expense. That's really important for you to understand that. But now, anybody still think it's possible to end equalization? And if you do, let's look at the 5 hurdles to change the Constitution. The first is that you would have to have a majority vote in the House of Commons. Well, we already know the electoral imbalance there, right? You'd have to similarly have a majority vote in the Senate to end equalization or any other egregious program that harms Alberta. Number 3, you'd have to have 7 of 10 provincial legislatures. Remember that, 7 of 10 provincial legislatures representing 50% of the population also voting in favor of ending equalization to benefit Alberta. And Quebec has a veto.
Yeah, I know.
They believe that they have a veto. But in addition, they get 2 of every $3 of equalization. So how do you think they would vote just on that basis? But actually the 4th hurdle is the veto itself. But the 5th hurdle is the Supreme Court itself. Constitutional battles are adjudicated by the Supreme Court. Now, we already know that, I don't know if anybody has any court issues outstanding right now, but just general court cases now take years oftentimes to resolve. Constitutional battles at that level take decades. How much time do you think we have before we go over the abyss into the hell of the Great Reset? Not much time, in my opinion. We're already hearing the provincial government, Kenny wants to experiment with the digital ID. You probably heard that. But more than that, the Supreme Court is constituted by 9 justices, all appointed from the Prime Minister's office. 3 from Quebec, 3 from Ontario, 1 from the Maritimes, 2 from all of Western Canada. How do you think they're going to vote? In favor of Alberta? Unlikely.
You love our money too much.
And if you want current evidence of that, look at how the Supreme Court twisted itself into a bloody pretzel in order to approve a carbon tax, completely overriding the Constitution. And finally, there have been 2 attempts to change the Constitution. One was the Meech Lake Accord and one was the Charlottetown Accord. They both failed. So in other words, trying to fix Alberta's circumstances in confederation is really extremely difficult, if not absolutely impossible. That's important to understand. The question is then, like I said earlier, can we chart a new path forward as an independent sovereign nation? And like I said, no, not right now. But you folks can provide the leverage to either fix Alberta's circumstances in confederation or for Alberta to become a new sovereign nation. And that leverage that you can provide is voting in favor of a successful referendum on independence. Because that then, for the first time in 116 years, gives Alberta the moral and legal legitimacy to chart a new path forward, either within Canada or as a new sovereign constitutional republic. So how would it work? Well, consider this. In 2023, a government is elected that agrees to protect your interests, your individual freedoms and rights, your prosperity and your self-determination, and will hold a referendum on independence. Okay, so let's assume 2023, that government is elected. Then what happens is the government passes as the first piece of legislation, the Alberta Sovereignty Act. And what does that do? It accelerates the process of taking control of policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. Taking control of provincial tax collection sets the stage for taking control of federal tax collection. Now, that can be done within 24 months, 18 to 24 months. Then you have a referendum on independence, and it will be successful. Now the government can go to Ottawa and say, this is what we want. We want control of federal tax collection. We will determine what money we will give to Ottawa, but we will have control of our healthcare system, education, infrastructure, the development and transport of our natural resources, unfettered by the federal government. And that then is a commitment to those people who want Alberta to stay in Canada, but with a better deal. But the outcome of those negotiations right now are unknown. And it's extremely unlikely, just like the Brexit negotiations, where Britain finally said, forget it, we're out. So you negotiate for 6 to 12 months on what you want. And if you don't get what you want, if the provincial government does not get what it wants for the people of Alberta, then unilaterally it can say, we have the moral and legal legitimacy after 6 to 12 months of negotiating, we are going to become a new sovereign nation. And that's really as simple as it is. It's not complicated at all. The legal infrastructure for that to take place is there. The Clarity Act makes it clear how to make that happen. Now, what about the Alberta Prosperity Project? Where do we fit in all of this? Why did I say earlier that we want to do something unique that has never been done before, that has the probability, not the possibility, the probability of protecting your interests, your individual freedoms and rights, and your prosperity and your self-determination? Why did I say that? I said that because when we grow this membership to 500,000 to 1 million or 1.5 million people, we will control the outcome of the 2023 election. This has never been done before, and you can help make it happen. And thousands of people are coming on board to help us make this happen collectively. Now, why that number? I want to introduce you to what is called the 3.5% rule, coined by Erica Chenoweth. She is a Harvard professor. She studied societal movements over a couple hundred years, and she determined that 3.5% of the population can change the direction of that society. When Jason Kenney and the UCP were elected, they had 120,000 members. That's 3.5% of the 3.4 million voters in Alberta. Now, there's 4.4 million people, but 1 million are not voters. So with 500,000 or 1 million or 1.5 million people, we will absolutely control the outcome of the election. As Ralph Klein used to say, find a parade and get in front of it. Who do you think the politicians are calling that they want to get in front of this movement? They're calling us. We're in touch with all of them except the NDP. So we know that the independence movement parties want to get in front of this movement. And we know that many of the UCP MLAs want to get in front of this movement. We don't know what's going to happen with the UCP because we have no idea what's going to happen with their leadership, etc. And that's a whole other discussion. But we've thought through the algorithms of what can happen. In any case, so how are we growing this membership? Well, one of the things that we're doing is we've engaged a marketing and advertising company called Rapid Boost. And we're rolling out, and we've already started, a massive educational campaign on social media, the legacy media, radio, television, and the alternate media, Rebel News and Western Standard, True North, etc. So this is how we're rolling out this educational campaign. But probably the most important thing that we're doing is we're setting up educational chapters throughout the province. And I thought, and I just found out this tonight from Lori, Shannon, that I thought we'd maybe set up maybe 90 to 100 chapters. But I already know we're already, and we just started on February the 18th, even though we've been working on getting ready for this rollout. But we just started on February the 18th. But we're already at 130 chapters. By the end of May, we may have 250 chapters. I don't know how quickly this is going to grow because it's just mushrooming. People like yourselves are volunteering to volunteer and help or to be a chapter leader, and Shannon will explain more about that a little later. So I'm really excited about that. So if you think of a chapter, and a chapter's got 10 people, and each of those 10 people, so if you got 300 chapters, say, and you got 10 people in each chapter, and each chapter, or each one of those 10 people recruits 100 people, well, there's 300,000 members right there. You see how we can build this together, build this community together to save ourselves? It's really quite brilliant. And Shannon is leading that along with our chief operating officer, who's not here this evening. But she's really taken the lead on this, and I'm really excited about the growth, and Jason in the back, and everybody on the team is involved, but there are some people that have to lead in certain ways. So that's what we're doing to grow this membership. And I want you to think about something. If not what we're doing, what is there else that will protect you, that will save this amazing province? What else is there? There isn't anything else. And that's what's really important to understand, which is why I really want you to seriously consider getting a membership. And if you've got the time to volunteer, and if you've got even more time to become a chapter leader. Now, at the back table, we also have, in addition to the memberships, a petition. And the petition is to force the government to have a referendum on independence. But we have two ways of making that happen. One is through this petition. We'd like you to sign it if you're in agreement. But in addition to that petition, if that didn't work for some reason, like I said, 18 to 24 months after electing an independence-focused government, then what happens is we have another referendum, or we have our first referendum. So we're not sure how this will all work out. It was drafted by Jeff Rath, who's a constitutional lawyer on our board. It has to be filled out properly, and it can't be an electronic copy. It has to be a signed, written copy that gets sent to his office. Now, I want to leave you with this. freedom is not free. And you cannot, ladies and gentlemen, you just can't have prosperity without freedom. And you know what will happen. You know what socialism brings? Universal mediocrity. I used to tell my residents in training, there's some issue with a patient. I say to them, look, there are three kinds of people in this world. You need to figure this out. There are three kinds of people in this world. Those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what the hell happened. And so you better figure out what's going on with that patient, because if you can't figure it out, you call me. And that's the way it was. And that's the way it is. So I hope you'll get involved and help us do something that's never been done before. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dennis Modry. So I forgot to mention that we're a not-for-profit organization. And so I brought this up here so I remember to tell you that we're going to pass the bucket a little later in the show. I did set it down twice before I brought it up here, though. Kind of forgot. Our next presenter is from Lloydminster, Alberta. He is a brilliant industrial organization economist and a published author. He is a speaker and commentator on political and ethical issues and has studied under some of Canada's foremost economists. With his keen interest, wit, bright mind, he offers so much perspective to the Alberta Prosperity Project, and he's here to demonstrate the many merits and benefits of a free and prosperous Alberta. He is also our acting VP of Economics. He cares deeply about the state that Alberta finds herself in and about how intrusively our governments meddle in our economy in order to facilitate our ruin. Here with an economic forecast for an independent nation of Alberta, Mr. Tanner Hnidey.
There is an old economist, and his name is Jean-Baptiste. He's French, but forgive me. A nemesis of government. And he said, at the beginning of the 18th century, 50 years before the time of the Bandini of Siena had shown, both from reason and experience, that there had never been a scarcity of food except in those countries where the government had itself interfered to supply the people. That's what Baptiste said. I was initially serenaded into the discipline of economics, in part because it was promoted to be a jack of all trades. To be a successful economist, or in my case, to be an economist, one must possess, at the very least, a rudimentary knowledge of calculus, philosophy, law, algebra, and other subjects. So, today, for the moment, we are going to transform into chemists and study some atoms. On the one hand, I have a nitrogen atom. On the other hand, I have a nitrogen atom. And the two, like Romeo and Juliet, magnetize, unite together in molecular matrimony and form N2, two nitrogens. And that is the way that nitrogen exists in our atmosphere. It's the most common molecule in the air. Nitrogen makes up about 70%, 75 to 77% of our atmosphere. Now, as you know, crops like durum and malt and other cereals like to munch on nitrogen for food, to grow big and strong with abundant yields. The problem is that crops can't digest N2 as it naturally exists. They can't convert N2 into nourishment. So, like blending solid food into a puree for a baby, that N2, that molecule, needs to be ripped apart and changed and broken down into a soluble meal for the crops, for the grain. Specific crops like peas, as you know, or plants like clover, can perform such a reaction and deposit that consumable nitrogen into the soil. But you also know that that process is inefficient and slow. And so we take a trip to Redwater, to one of the largest synthetic fertilizer plants on the planet. And we watch the Haber process in action. Here's how it works. You take some air, the same air that you and I are breathing, and then you take some Alberta natural gas, certified natural gas, and you break down the air into pure nitrogen, filter it out, and you break down the fossil fuel into pure hydrogen. And then you transport the nitrogen and the hydrogen through a steering hot compressor. And you smash the atoms together, the nitrogen and the hydrogen walloped together, so to say. And then you synthesize what's known as NH3, ammonia. And lo and behold, Redwater has created fertilizer, or nitrogen that crops can eat. And it is literally one of the most important inventions of all time. Baptiste, who's an environmental professor, argues that without this production of fertilizer in the year 2000, let alone 2023, nearly half of all land on all ice-free continents would need to be occupied for farming, compared to the just under 15% that is utilized today, thanks to fertilizer. More than that, and this is really going to send environmentalists into a frenzy, Smeal concludes that some 3 to 4 billion people have life today who otherwise wouldn't, because of nitrogen fertilizer, which also means that countless billions are alive because of Alberta's industrious grain and beef producers, hardworking truck drivers, and diligent agricultural traders, all of whom have done more to eliminate world hunger than anything the federal government or the WEF or the UN has ever done in the history of its existence. But as you know, something is happening. Something is going on with fertilizer. My best friend is a farmer. My dad grew up on a grain farm. My mom grew up on a dairy. She's here with me today. Just a little while ago, my friend or his family purchased fertilizer for $700 to $800 a ton. Right now, $1,700 per ton. And so I wanted to set for you, from an economic perspective, what's actually happening. Why are fertilizer prices so high? And is there anything an independent Alberta could do about it? Imagine you are the current government. Imagine you are a bureaucrat, armed with every tool and statistic at your disposal. If it's information you require, it's information you shall have. Your first contact is an economist. And informs you of a lot of the things that are wrong with government, but he also informs you of what is perhaps the fundamental rule of economics. All else equal, the less of something you have, the higher the price. It's a fundamental rule of economics. The less of something you have, the more valuable it is, the higher the price. That's reflected in the price. Sources then proceed to tell you that the geopolitical disruption in Ukraine and in the Russian bloc, aggravated by federal sanctions against Russia, will reduce Russian imports of fertilizer by about 30% this year, which is significant when you realize that 85 to 90% of all Eastern Canada's supply of fertilizer comes from Russia. And so you have less fertilizer. According to our rule, the price will rise. Then you realize that COVID, or governments acting under the cover of COVID, have disrupted and fractured the supply chains of fertilizer. And so there's less fertilizer and the price will rise. More than that, woe is the Canadian currency. The Bank of Canada has printed too much money. They built this Frankenstein of inflation. And so input costs for producing fertilizer and for farming are increasing. And therefore, the prices are going to rise. You therefore arrive at the conclusion that the markets need to open up. The central bank needs to stop printing money, and the government needs to get out of the business of being in business. The problem is that your solutions make sense, and so you are promptly removed from office. Instead, it is appointed that environmental activists decide what to do. Here's what they are going to enforce. This is real. From their Healthy Environment, Healthy Economy plan. Quote, a national emissions reduction target of 30% below 2020 levels from fertilizers, and we are going to work with fertilizer manufacturers, farmers, provinces, and territories to develop an approach to meet that target, because direct emissions associated with synthetic nitrogen fertilizer application have increased by approximately 60% since 2005, and these emissions are projected to keep increasing. So they're reducing nitrogen fertilizer by 30% by the year, can you guess? 2030. So we know that the price of fertilizer is a problem. But what does the Canadian government do about it? They artificially restrict supply. And so the price of fertilizer will rise. But they are not finished with their work yet. They are not ready to retire from lending a helping hand. You and I remember that natural gas is a critical and major component for producing fertilizer. We need the hydrogen from natural gas to produce fertilizer. And its price is already soaring. But apparently the price isn't high enough, because the federal government, as you know, announced and implemented a carbon tax and a cap on fossil fuel emissions at 2020 levels, with declining 5-year caps beginning in 2025, and a promise to cut methane emissions from oil and gas 75% by 2030, while also proudly announcing they're not capping the emissions of the cement, steel, aluminum, or forestry sectors, all of them Eastern enterprises. Think then for a moment. If the government actually wanted to reduce the price of fertilizer for our benefit and for the benefit of farmers, do these policies, inflation, carbon taxes, phasing out oil and gas, and literally reducing the amount of fertilizer we can use, make any sense to you at all? No. No. Unless the government has ulterior motives. I am not prepared to say I know every detail of their plans. I am prepared to tell you that governments measuring metrics of nitrogen are devious. Here's what I mean. We need, they say, to reduce fertilizer emissions by 30% to save the world. But as you know, there are steps and initiatives and techniques that the farmers can employ and do employ to mitigate many of those emissions and losses and so on produced by oxidizing fertilizer. But government doesn't recognize them. That is, and I'm making up these numbers just for easy math. But say under normal conditions that 1 ton of fertilizer produces 1 ton of emissions. Again, this is just for easy mathematics, but the logic's the same. But by using innovative and efficient farming techniques, perhaps 1 ton of fertilizer now only produces half a ton of emissions. Government refuses to recognize that reduction. You see, to them, 1 ton of fertilizer means 1 ton of emissions, no matter what. It doesn't matter what you, as the farmer, do. If you inject a ton of fertilizer into the ground, the government will measure it as 1 ton of emissions. And so, the only way, as far as the federal government is concerned, to reduce nitrogen emissions is to adopt the disastrous European policy of regulating how much fertilizer each and every farmer can apply, which, again, all else equal, literally means Alberta farmers will produce less food. That is the policy which has been or is going to be adopted by our federal government. That is the problem. But I believe Alberta's independence is secure. You say, how? I say you start by confiscating all carbon tax policy. You incinerate that legislation in a furnace, and then you order a new law being constructed to ensure that carbon tax can never, ever, ever be implemented in Alberta. Then you proceed to unshackle the farmer from ridiculous government regulation, and you free him to buy the fertilizer that he needs, and you allow him to farm as only the farmer knows how, which is unmolested by the federal government. And not only so, but you constitutionally enshrine free banking in Alberta that wants to remove the government's monopoly on the supply of money. You totally lock up its ability to print in excessive quantities as it's doing so now, and then you crush the menace of inflation in our province once and for all time. And so when you eliminate the carbon tax and punishing natural gas producers and so on, well, in part, natural gas becomes cheaper. And so the input costs for fertilizer become cheaper and the price will go down. And when you let the farmer buy with, or pharmacy will, when you allow places like Redwater and other producers to generate the amount of fertilizer they believe is necessary, you have more fertilizer, it's in abundance, and the price will go down. And when you crush that menace of inflation and the dollar returns, a new dollar returns or becomes what it's supposed to be, input costs will decrease and prices will go down. And these are just three measures an independent Alberta could adopt. And there are many, many, many more. And it is once those policies are adopted that I, as an economist, will have no hesitation to state that Alberta will become one of the most profitable, wealthy, and freest nations in the world. Thank you.
And hopefully our grandbabies are just.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tanner Hnidey. So we'll do, I've got a few questions here somewhere. We'll do the questions and answer session here. We'll have a quick break and then we'll have a couple more speakers. Okay, question number 1. How can we deal with foreign investment that is already in Alberta?
You know, one of the things is we want to make Alberta one of the most attractive places in the world to invest. Investment is not necessarily bad at all. It's when investment by foreign entities controls Alberta. So one of the things that we would advocate for is that no foreign company could ever have a controlling interest in an Alberta-based business.
When we reach independence, how will we keep corruption from making its way back into the government?
That's a good question. Actually, they're all good questions. But one of the things that you need to know, and you should probably go onto the website and look at number 1, the bylaws. And you'll see just from the bylaws how a party representing the government would be held accountable through recall in a very much more robust fashion than currently exists. Similarly, in the governance section, if you look in the policy and governance document, you'll see there how the government would be structured. Only 9 portfolios, by the way, so much smaller government. But again, the level of accountability would be such that the kind of corruption that has occurred can never occur before again. And last but not least, and perhaps most important, is that we've learned a lot in terms of the errors that have occurred with the development of the Canadian Constitution, as well as the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We've also learned, and you've all seen this, some of the problems that have occurred with the U.S. Constitution as well. So what we would be advocating for is preventing constitutionally the kind of corruption that has occurred and can occur. And so, yes, there is a way to control and minimize the kind of corruption that has occurred. Are you ever going to be able to eliminate it entirely? Probably not. But I'll bet we could, with a new nation. Just think, we're starting as a new nation, and we can create it as we want. So we're going to roll out a constitution proposal to everybody with our constitutional lawyers, John Carpey from Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, as well as our own constitutional lawyer. And we're going to throw this out to you and see what you think about it. But this is the way we would be advocating on controlling corruption.
What is going to happen to my Canada pension plan and my investments?
We'll get better. Modry often uses the example of a veteran or anyone in France. If they were Canadian, they still receive their Canadian pension plan, even though they're living in France. As well, independence gives us an opportunity to negotiate new tax treaties and so on, which is very common. Canada has tax treaties with numerous countries because it benefits Canada as well. More than that, the Fraser Institute just completed a study that stated at present, Canadians contribute 10.2%, whatever it might be, their checks to the Canadian pension plan. In an independent Alberta, in order to receive the same benefits you do now, you could slash those contributions in half. So you have honestly nothing to worry about.
Tanner and I often do this. Who wants to answer the question? But I just add to it. Remember what I said earlier, we overfund the pension plan by $3 billion. So that $3 billion would immediately go to our pensioners, and some of you are out there already. And this can happen much faster than you think. If we come together, we can have this by 2025. I want you to think about that, 2025, 2026 at the latest.
What is your plan for schools and healthcare?
Gee, that's a simple question. Well, let's start with the education system. As we touched on earlier, there certainly are problems within the school system, and I don't need to highlight what they are. But fundamentally, again, I'm going to refer you to look at the education section in the policy and governance document. I guarantee you'll love it. And same thing with the healthcare section. But I will make a couple of points. There's nothing wrong with charter schools and competition for healthcare. So I mean for education, so that you as parents can make a decision where you want your child to go. So the funding would follow the child, whether it's in the public school system or in the charter school system or private school system. Similarly, I can assure you on the healthcare side, once again, funding would follow the patient. But having worked in the system for as many years as I did, I've seen the difficulty and the challenges with respect to having a high quality healthcare system. Our healthcare system functions in the lowest quartile, and it's funded in the highest quartile. So obviously there's something clearly wrong. And I'm just going to give you one example of just how inefficient it is. So as a cardiac surgeon, we do one open heart case followed by another open heart case. And there would be about an hour and a half delay between the two cases. Now, that's an hour and a half in which people are being paid. And what are they doing? So we went on a fact-finding mission to Cedars-Sinai, and I was absolutely blown away by what I saw. When the first patient left the operating room, there was a team of people that came in. Well, the patient was wheeled out. All the used equipment was wheeled out. There was a team of people who came in and cleaned things. And then the next patient was rolled in, already prepped and draped and anesthetized. It took 3 minutes between cases. When that first patient left the operating room, the second team came in, the patient was prepped and draped, the incision was made. That's efficiency. When I was at Stanford, I was in the ICU looking after a patient, and I was delayed about 20 minutes starting a case as the chief resident. And when I got to the operating room, the head nurse in the operating room tore a strip off me because I cost that patient and that patient's family X dollars by being 20 minutes late. So time is money, and the inefficiency of our healthcare system is staggering, and it's corrupt as well.
Yeah. Should I be worried about the money that I have in the bank?
The classic answer. So economists are notorious for saying, on the one hand, But on the other hand, and I might do the same thing here. What? And this is not me being partisan. This is just objective fact. What our prime minister did in just a day by seizing accounts and freezing assets will have repercussions for the banking system in Canada for decades to come. Because you and I and investors, Canadians and foreigners, have absolutely now no more confidence in our banking system. Who's to say if tomorrow your savings will be where they are today? I don't know, and neither can you. And how could you know? Because what the government did was prove that in an instant, if they want to freeze assets and seize funds legally, which is astonishing to me, they can do so. So you have every right, in my opinion, to be concerned about holdings and accounts. On the other hand, and this is just a hard fact of living under large, overweight, bloated governments, is that if they want to seize your funds, no matter where they are, they can. But this speaks to the fundamental problem, in my opinion, of the economic market here in Canada. What are we supposed to do? Canadians have tried everything. We hide assets, the government comes after us. We don't hide assets, the government comes after us. And so what it seems to show me as an economist is, as I mentioned, the absolute necessity of constitutionally enshrining a law that government cannot seize their assets or accounts. Government has to get out of the business of money creation, money supply, and money itself. What I would say is I can't legally offer any financial advice because we're a nonprofit and I'm not a chartered accountant or anything. I would say what we have seen in the last half year should push us as hard as anything to pursue Alberta's independence.
And just to put a fine point on it to remind you, the Alberta Sovereignty Act includes changing banking regulations, security regulations, so that CRA and at least for ATB and Alberta-based credit unions, CRA and the federal government can never access them. So you would be protected under these circumstances with that new piece of legislation. Oh, one other thing. You can plug your curl top if you want. No, one other thing is I want you to think about this. An independence government is elected 2023, and the polling is looking really good for Alberta independence. The Canadian dollar will be plummeting. And if there is a successful referendum on independence, the Canadian dollar will really plummet. Probably be 30 to 40 cents to the US dollar at that point. Because Alberta contributes so much to the Canadian economy. So without Alberta, the Canadian dollar is going to fall. So one of the things, and again, I'm not a financial advisor either, but you might want to consider watching what happens on the political economic spectrum here, and consider putting your money in a stronger currency. Could be the US dollar, could be something else.
I think you kind of touched on this in your presentation. It says, how long do you see this entire independent process taking?
Well, like I said, 2023, you elect that independence-focused government, and then you take control of policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection, and you implement that Sovereignty Act. Then you have the independence referendum. That's going to occur sometime between 24 and 30 months, in my estimation, because I think it's important to take control of these things first. Then you have that referendum, you negotiate for 6 to 12 months. Okay, so we're at 2025 now. The negotiations fail. 2026, we unilaterally declared we're an independent sovereign nation. Why? Because we have had the moral and legal legitimacy to do so. The Supreme Court has ruled that this is possible. And the Clarity Act makes it clear that we can do this. And that's the timeline.
Three more questions. First question is for you as the audience. How many of you are going to leave here today without a membership? Raise your hand. Oh, nobody. We always get the question that says, what is a chapter? And what is a chapter leader and how do I start one? So Dennis talked about this as well. A chapter is basically a group in your community that would spread the word about the Alberta Prosperity Project, deliver rack cards with the information, maybe have memberships, petitions, etc. We have all of the information that you'll ever need on our communication platform that to facilitate your success in being a chapter leader. There can be 2 people in your chapter, as long as you are still spreading the good word about the Alberta Prosperity Project. We have things like toolkits and videos that you can access online, and it's just more information. The more information you have, the more apt you are to talk about this. The more apt you are to talk about this, the more people are going to join us. And as Dennis said, we need all of you to join us. And plus, if you want to be a chapter leader, you get to work with people like me. Jason Lemieux is a chapter regional leader. There's a couple chapter leaders here, actually. I can see Frank right there. And Rhonda Wilson's at the back. You can talk to any of those people just to see what they do. That's pretty much it. It's pretty easy. Last question. When we reach independence, how will immigration be controlled? We may have more people trying to immigrate than we can handle.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Well, it gets to the, if you build it, they will come, right? And so if we create the most prosperous and freest nation in the world, why would people not want to come here? But remember this, you know, we're 4.5 million, 4.4 million people, and we're twice the size land area than California. So we have tremendous opportunity for people who want to be entrepreneurs, who have a can-do attitude, who have a work ethic, and who want to be part of this amazing province. So many of us are immigrants anyhow. Our forefathers are immigrants. So why would we not want to have merit-based, I say that, merit-based immigration? I mean, there are going to be businesses that are looking for people, and we're going to have like the lowest unemployment rate in history. And so businesses are going to need people. So they're going to be looking for people who have the skills and the education for that particular position and that particular organization. So we're not against immigration, but it's got to be focused and proper and no chain-link immigration.
Yeah.
That's all the questions that I have. We'll have a 10-minute break. There's water and coffee and snacks right over there.
I am the least person to have any knowledge of economics or whatever. However, I know that you would not have got here if you weren't a very wise man.
Oh,
Very
I
good.
appreciate that. Thank you. Yes.
I can take my confidence that what you're telling me
It's true.
is more than what I've had up to now.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's a very high compliment. Thank you.
I'm a very basic uneducated person being raised 20 kids. I don't know how many brothers and sisters you have.
That's the highest attraction.
That's just
Oh,
And
all other professions exist for that profession.
we come around with dollars and cents.
No, that's right.
Right?
Ah, it's an investment. Right. The reward comes. Ah,
More than money. So, but I appreciate
Oh.
you coming here.
thank you for coming.
Absolutely, this has got to go.
I agree. I think it will.
Bye.
Yeah.
It'll take off.
I think so.
I think
It's already taken off.
Just a matter of getting it to the people.
Exactly. Yeah. And look, yeah, that's right. It's good. Yeah. I'm excited. Yeah.
Okay.
In the red, very sharp. I said I like nice styles. So yes. Anyways. Oh no. Well.
It's my own machine. Anyways, so it's like, you know, in 1974, you should go senior to the direction. Basically, it's like working hard, especially
Right.
the private.
Right. Right.
Give it to them.
Right.
Yes.
We don't speak against it.
Go back.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yes, I would go even further than 474. Insofar as what I mentioned with this pre-banking idea was, as you like at present, being in government, what's out, and you're super bond, no, right? And the Bank of Canada buys it. They're supposed to be two separate entities, but they're not, as you know. And so the government prints at their will. The bank pays the money. Okay, so I and it out. Right. So that's an issue. Right. So what's the confusion? Question you wrestle with is, you perform this system without scaring Albertans? Because if I said tomorrow, I'm going back to this now, I guess you probably would have a lot of Albertans go to the bank on a run. Because who they get scared? Okay, you know, it's just the hand we've been dealt with. So what we're looking at right now is what's called a banking system, which is okay. Suppose that tomorrow Alberta gained independence. At the moment, just out of realistic need, you have to stay on the Canadian currency for a little while. Not long. Okay, that's fine. That's totally legal. You can do, you know, you can do it. As you're doing,
Yeah.
it's on price. Because if the government can find a way around it, they will get around it. You constantly can enshrine that an Alberta currency or the Canadian currency at the present isn't the only form of legal tender that can be accepted at any business or anywhere. So what you enable is other banks that aren't restricted by government to begin their own enterprise. And so if you wanted to have a gold-backed bank, which I'm sure you would have, no, you can. That started up and said, we have an X amount of gold, transfer your funds to us, and we'll back it by gold. And then you can actually start paying with gold, with a gold coin or with a debit card backed by gold. You could do so. And there would be nothing that the government could do to say, no, you can't Walmart accept gold as a currency. That would be nonsense. That would make the currency uncompetitive. And so what you would do is, in effect, depending on what the central bank is doing, still have figure out, it would actually stop doing what it's doing in order to keep generating profit. You see? And so the whole idea is if you introduce competition into the market, into the currency market, you take away all that power from the government to do what they're doing now. And let Albertans choose for themselves what they think would be best. Whether or not it's the most efficient, ideal option, I don't know yet. It's kind of the difference between jumping off of a cliff into the water into a new currency versus going down the slide. If that makes sense. Some people are totally happy to jump off the cliff. A lot of people are, but a lot aren't as well. And because the economy is so cyclical, it's this game of trying to not collapse it, but also make the big change, if that makes sense. All right.
Oh,
No, so
but
oh, you mean in New Alberta or now? Oh yeah, oh for sure. Oh yes. Oh, and oh yeah, for sure. Yes, yes. As long as any currency can compete as it wants to compete, it works. Because what will happen is the most efficient currency will be adopted as the mainstream. Again, there'll be other ones you could choose. So if you, like me, are concerned about inflation, I wouldn't touch the S&P with a 10-foot pole. I'd get on both. They say, great, want to back it like this. Perfect. And so then, as more and more people did that, that bank that's on it would have one of two options. Either they could collapse, go bankrupt, or they could rein in their printing. It was right. And stop inflation and stop giving out X number of dollars to governments. That's the idea. Yeah. Yeah. From what we found so far, and just what research we found from Cato Institute and stuff, it seems to be the most widely accepted, plausible solution to this.
So I have to ask you one more time.
Oh yes, I see.
Wonder.
Oh yeah, you have to. Oh yeah, yeah. So like, if it hasn't happened already, it will be soon. Where the money the government is printing is going to be used to just finance the interest on bonds. That makes sense. That's how bad this. Yes.
So yeah, it's back a month ago.
Yes.
The guys with all them like the tax federation guys, we're left
Yeah.
and we're in debt. What? $1 billion. I mean that number was
Canada's trillion, and we're 100 billion, I think. Yeah.
so those guys know you.
Oh, do they?
Franco,
No way.
you know.
No, not very well. Well, maybe I might have.
Yes, yeah. He said he was gonna, he's gonna want to.
Yeah. They're smart. They're smart coaches.
And the other guy was with the standard.
Oh yes. Oh okay.
He said he was gonna go.
That'd be exciting.
I just told your mother. And then. I know. You got a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. She's going to tell me what he was told.
Oh yes.
I don't know if I
fun.
can repeat it.
Oh no, that's got it. Oh yeah.
We
I think we have like 80 questions coming out on the website next week, so we're excited. Because it has on, yeah. Questions. Sure. I'm on Ontario. Right. It's all about against it. There's a reason I can't stay there. You know, I know right. Ontario's a shit. So please and my friends and I said this well, I mean, a government probably couldn't be elected unless they guarantee that to be honest. But this has been for years over how many years this has been set up that government's going to provide it, and so it would be cruel and wrong to just tomorrow rip out the way. So I couldn't. Even just, I mean, of course, we're not a government, but from a government standpoint, from a political standpoint, I couldn't see a single public official getting into it. They said, yeah, all of and you know, just the economics of the side, you just, you only said about 3 months, which logistically, I do. So no, I wouldn't. Everything again, yeah, so much is paid. Yeah, so much is paid, it's wasted. A lot more money. It only stay in one province, that's my right. Yeah. So,
Things did a good job.
oh, thank you. No, fine. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
We like that. Somebody did.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, thank you. Oh, yes, there's more of them. All right, those are fun.
They are, yeah.
Actually, tomorrow, I did an interview with a lawyer. It's coming out tomorrow. I'm excited. Very, it's called First Freedoms Foundation. It just started up in these earliest. Yeah, it's exciting.
I have an off the record question.
Oh yes.
I'm a big fan of Goldback, you know, money and all that stuff. I got the Mises and all that.
Oh yeah, Von Mises,
you know,
man. Oh yeah, Von
Neil
Mises.
off the
Oh yeah, totally.
However, I remember, I'm old enough to remember the Quebec referendum in 1995.
Right.
They wanted to use the Canadian dollar to become a sovereign country,
Right.
but maintain the Canadian dollar.
Right.
My question is, what kind of fiat currency?
Yeah.
Because that could very well be what it is.
Right.
What fiat currency would the independent Alberta adopt? Would it be a Canadian dollar? Would it be an independent currency pegged to the US dollar? For monetary stability.
Yeah. For the start, you mean at least.
Not what individual people would do before and during. Not like that.
Right.
Just in terms of official currency for an independent country.
Well,
What would you be thinking?
as far as fiat goes, like there's an economist named George Selgin, I think his name. He's also, you heard of him? He's kind of an Austrian, but he's also maybe more monetary. It's kind of in between. And he says, how would you do it basically? How would you transition? So to say, he says, well, on one hand, it would probably, from a government's perspective, it would depend on what the Canadian dollar was looking like. I think if it was getting weaker and weaker, they'd be hesitant to stay on that. But let's just suppose that it was floating and semi-normal. Okay. I'd have I'd have no problem in that first transition. Getting into maybe a little bit more strategy. Let's suppose that for 6 months I'm going to go through. I would have no problem again because I would try this free banking idea. During that time, trying to set up your own Alberta currency, just be it. And then what you would do is I would go by, I'd have, again, I don't know what Von Mises would say, I wouldn't like it, but I'd have no problem going with Friedman's rule, whereas you grow the currency by a set percent every year, 2%, whatever the growth of the economy is. But you, again, you have to constitutionally enshrine that. You basically lock up the hands of the politician. But it would just be more for international purposes, because again, when you introduce that free banking, it's, if you want to go to a bank that's a gold standard and that has backed by gold, giver, by all means. And if you want to go pay for your house in gold, or if you want to go pay for your groceries in gold, by all means. If you want to go to a bank that practices 100% of reserves.
I love the gold stuff.
Yeah.
But there has to be presumptuous for me to say.
No.
Presumptuous for me to say.
Yeah.
Rude for me to say.
Yeah.
But you have to have. I love the free banking. I love all these.
Oh yeah.
But you have to have a big sort of alternative model. So in other words, the currency
For the start.
U.S. dollar or paying an Alberta currency to the Canadian.
Yeah, I don't think
Iceland did that. Even Iceland was a small country, right?
Right.
It's a small currency area.
Right.
So small currency area.
I think I would be more conducive to pegging it to the American dollar than Canada's. But I would still make it like it would still be Alberta's in currency. Oh yeah, I wouldn't stay on Canada. I would just.
That's very clear.
Yeah. The whole point would just be to stay on the Canadian currency just for a little while, just during a transition, and then one day, once you had figured out the exchange rate bills, you say, okay, on so and so a date, we're going to officially transition to Alberta's currency, and then over the next couple of weeks, you head to the bank and exchange your Canadian dollars for time bucks, or whatever we call them, and that'll be the new fiat. And then, if you want to go to a different bank and exchange after gold, fine. Fair. But you're right. You do need one. That's the point. Is that I think
I'm not saying that I have the answer. Even
no, totally.
But in terms of a policy, when you would explain this to people,
right?
To say, well, we're going to go from where we would like to go from here,
right,
to an independent currency pegged to the U.S. dollar,
right?
And then obviously there's a transition period in that all right. Sort of stuff. Right. But there's a clear alternative.
Oh yeah.
And a realistic alternative.
Right.
I mean,
and that's. Yeah, like I know, like you said, those Austrians, I think a lot of them would go just to tomorrow. Right. But of course, I was telling her, did that, you'd have a run on the banks tonight. You'd be really scared, and that whole thing would collapse. It's like, that's the issue. It's not even, not saying presented to saying we're not trying to get rid of the fiat currency, because that's what's been institutionalized. I mean, that's just what people use right now. So
unfortunately, there's too much weight behind that.
It's just the hand we've been dealt. But we're just saying, well, also, if you want to do something else.
I can see vulnerabilities in the oil and gas sector.
Yeah.
For the Alberta currency going up and down.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't do that.
That could be a challenge. But you peg it to a larger currency like the U.S. dollar, and you're willing to defend it when you're right. So that is a full thing.
No, and again, gold's not perfect either, right? By any means, you're exactly right. It's just, well, yeah, versus what's realistic. So yeah, I would put it to American definitely before.
Totally, it's not a trip up question.
No, don't. Yeah, no.
Sure.
I these are the best. I love these questions. Then you can figure out what you hadn't thought of before, what you weren't thinking about, and you can discuss. No, it's great. Yeah, that's what I would do. But I think that makes sense. I think it's easy. I think it's not easy, but I think it's very simple. You make it very simple.
The nitrogen comments you made scared the shit out of me.
Isn't that wild? Wild. Yeah.
I'm about to avoid myself. Because you think, because that's now.
That's now. Oh yeah.
I think next year. These things filter through.
Oh yeah. That's right.
It's
not this year. It's
right now.
It's next year.
Whatever. It's more or less okay. But you wait 12 months from now, which is when these things all get passed through. And you're like, oh my lord.
They want to kill our supply.
Right.
Yeah, well done.
Ask everybody to take their seats, please. Okay. Everybody sitting down in their seats. And be quiet. You're gonna miss your recess if you don't get back to your seats right now.
Excited, bunch of exciting students out here.
Okay. Here we go. Our next guest is from Pincher Creek, Alberta. She was born in Fort McMurray and raised in Glovertown, Newfoundland. When I talked to her yesterday about her intro, she said, just tell them I'm short, I'm feisty, and I'm full of life. But I can tell you that she is very much more than that. She had a 20-year career spanning through 2 companies until she chose bodily autonomy over forced experimental injection. She fought hard for basic human rights guaranteed under the Charter for herself and for her co-workers of 20 years. But then all of that changed and she was let go. And on that day, she too found out how important it is to stand up for what you believe in, even if you're standing alone. She made the trip to Ottawa with people she had never met until she hopped into the truck and headed east. She made fast friends, great memories, and was part of the front line with the trucker convoy to end all mandates. She's joined us at the Alberta Prosperity Project as a chapter leader in her community, and she has been a big part of the membership team at a lot of our events. Ladies and gentlemen, here with a discussion about the corruption and immorality of big business is Naomi Smart.
Well, thanks, Shannon. And now, my warning, this is the emotional part of the program. Since 2001, I have been employed in, as Shannon mentioned, the Alberta oil and gas. Can everybody hear me? Sorry. The Alberta oil and gas industry. My last position was with Canadian Natural Resources Limited, CNRL, for those of you who don't know. I'll come back to that a little later. Forgive me for having to read from my script. I'm not quite as seasoned as the other speakers here tonight, but I'm going to give it a go. And I'm going to read the audience a little bit. Don't judge a book by its cover. I can take any 379 peak with an 18 double over, and I can back her up and I can drive her forward. My dad taught me how to drive when I was quite young, and once the diesel gets in, it doesn't get out. So back in 2001, I began as a contractor on the Albion Sands Energy site just north of Fort McMurray. My official christening into the mining community came about a year later when Albion Sands hired me. I loved it. I loved everything about my career. I watched the sun rise and set every day. I made friends who became family. There's nothing about it I can't say good things about. I loved it. In the last 19 years, I've worn many hats. I started out on a 797B haul truck. I operated most other equipment in the mine, including 24M and H graders, D6 to D11 dozers, and everything in between. I went on into dispatch and into supervising. I did all this usually as a single parent. My chosen profession has allowed for a very comfortable life for me and my son. There have been many birthdays that I have missed, many school programs that I have missed, but in the end, I wouldn't trade it for a moment. We have a great life. My mining career took me to different sites. I met a lot of people. And I started at Albion in 2003-4. I went to Imperial Oil in 2015-16. I spent a few years there. And by December of 2021, it had come full circle, and I returned to Albion Sands. Albion Sands had been purchased from Shell Energy by CNRL. 2021 was a very strange year to seek out new employment. As much as I would like to steer clear of what I'm about to touch on, COVID has completely changed the way people do business, and especially for these large resource companies and corporations. I was hired via a Zoom interview, and away I went. COVID was and is a huge part of life on site. Whether you drive in, drive out, fly in, fly out, it's just everywhere. CNRL, by the way, has reinstated their mask mandate. So, to shorten things up, CNRL began distributing the propaganda last year. It escalated from, we will never, ever implement a mandate for you folks. It's not going to happen. From May to September, that's as long as it took, September 23rd, 2021, our company said, if you do not take this needle, you will no longer be employed for CNRL. I was hesitant. I'm still hesitant to accept this procedure. I use the word hesitant very, very loosely. To be sure I would be protected under our charter, and because I'm a kind of person who doesn't like to leave my fate in the hands of others, I contacted a lawyer that I had known on a very casual level prior to this. His name is James Kitchen. I'm not sure if anyone here knows his name. James obliged our group at CNRL. Once word got out that I was going to facilitate a meeting with a lawyer and get our rights, we ended up with almost 2,200 folks at CNRL within 3 weeks that wanted to get information, see what their rights were. So we had about 170 people tune in to our Zoom meeting at the beginning of October. Less than a month later, October 26, 2021, I got a call from a manager that I had met once. It was about 12 seconds long. He couldn't even say my name right, and I was dismissed immediately without cause. As of now, I am still unemployed. My 20-year career wiped out, gone. I still stand by every conviction I have. CNRL wanted to send a message to all the people that had signed on to resist the atrocity that they wanted to inflict on everybody. They sent a message, all right. Little over 1,900 people out of the 21 are still working for CNRL. I will always speak out when I feel something is wrong. I will always speak out, especially against these heartless companies who don't care. They just don't care. On a side note, they asked me to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and I promptly said, nah. I'm going to explain or touch on a few personal stories from CNRL, people that are directly connected to me, things that have happened to these folks since CNRL brought the mandates in. Since September 23rd, 2021, they had a completely compliant workforce, meaning every person on site after December 1st was completely inoculated. Since that time, there have been hundreds of people getting sick and taking time off work. There is one supervisor still working, I'm personally connected to, who has had to take time off of work 3 separate times for testing positive. He has received 3 meals. But at least he's compliant and he still has a job, right? Yeah. During the time when I first wrote this address, it was for the it was for the Calgary rally in November, the Calgary Freedom Rally. And believe it or not, it's much easier to speak in front of a bunch of people outside than in here. I don't know why. There was a former coworker of mine who had been hospitalized with a stroke after his 2nd dose. No correlation, no talk, keep it quiet. Another instance, after receiving permission from her family, I'll talk about a young lady who at 26 received her 2nd shot on a Monday. I looked at her Facebook profile and I saw a post that she had made. And the post said, "This shot is really kicking my ass." That was a Monday. By Friday, that healthy 26-year-old was gone. The family has so many questions. No one's going to answer them. One more, and that's it. Another young mother, whom I'm personally connected to, has been harassed by her supervisors on site for months. When will she get her shot? They were intimidating, strong-arming, pressuring, even promising opportunities for advancement if she would just comply. She didn't want to. She recently recovered from COVID, and she wanted the company to recognize her natural immunity. They didn't, and they still don't recognize natural immunity. Against her better judgment, she went for her first. It was administered by a company nurse on her last shift. They work a 7 and 7 on the shift on the site that I come from. She went home nauseous immediately. Within 15 hours, she was admitted to the Northern Lights Regional Health Center in Fort McMurray. She ended up in a wheelchair for a time. The doctor on duty said her reaction was due to her recent COVID infection, and that sometimes Pfizer really affects people that way. Takes, goes to your muscles. Who else knows what it does? I don't know. But that was his answer. Her heart rate raced and raced. They gave her some Ativan. They blamed her lack of mobility on a vitamin D deficiency. All she could think was, I'm doing this for my kids. I'm doing this for my husband. I need this job. She received a medical exemption from the medical doctor that saw her because they decided that her reaction was just a little too risky to continue with shot number 2. Understandably so. She, like thousands of others, submitted this medical exemption to CNRL for review. CNRL's response was, get your second shot and you can return to work. Folks, these are real people. These are people that we know, our neighbors, our friends, our family. Everybody knows someone. I'm not anti-vax. I am just reporting what I know. I know these things to be true. There are countless others in this group of corporations. Air Canada, the Government of Canada, CP Rail, the Big 5 banks, unions, Imperial Oil, Vestas, the list goes on. These corporations, they're all getting away with it under the guise of keeping their workforce safe. And if you call OH&S, that's what they'll tell you. It's a very gray area. Interestingly enough, these companies also have a COVID sick code. If you can tell, I'm a little bit upset about it. I get very angry. So this is where it comes into these companies being rewarded with the COVID money. Every company has a COVID sick code and they're getting money. I want to know the price on my head. I've filed an FOIP, Freedom of Information, and I won't stop until I expose where the money's going, who got it, and why they got it. I'll throw out a few numbers for you. Our premier, the esteemed Jason Kenney, from January 2020 to October 2021, he attended no less than 60 meetings with pharmaceutical companies, representatives, executives. And the last meeting he had was in October, and shortly thereafter, these corporations started implementing their mandates. I don't call it a coincidence. The Minister of Jobs and Innovation in 2021 doled out just over $1 billion of our money in grants to corporations. 105 million has been allocated to corporations such as CNRL for the carbon capture initiatives. They received 15 million last year. We deserve to know where our money is going. As for CNRL, they have decided that their jab mandate really isn't doing much help, and they need to man up their sites for the upcoming shutdown seasons. As of April 4th, 2022, you don't need anything to go to work for them anymore. Some have been called back to work, others have taken a different path. Personally, I would never go to work for a company who wouldn't promise this wouldn't happen again. I have not. Companies like this have no regard for our mental health, no regard for the financial burdens they place on us, dangling carrots in front of us. Lose your house. Your kids will starve, but here's your $100,000. Take this needle over here. That's what they did to us. The government is not without responsibility here. They have ruined my financial future because I had plans and I like to travel. Anyways, the government continues to ruin lives every day, every single day. I wish this weren't the case. I wish I could get up here and praise them. I wish I could say our lives are better because of the people that are supposed to be taking care of us. I can't. This is it. This is it for me. I'm not letting anyone off the hook. The events of 2021 have been a catalyst for how I'm going to live the rest of my life. This year, I have sent more than 80 emails to my MLA. I believe it's the same guy as this area. I have visited his office in High River. I have spoken with the administration on numerous occasions. I've been met with silence. I was even shooed out of their office at one time. That was fun. If our representatives are able to tell us that they are working behind the scenes or they can't much to affect change, all the change happens behind closed doors and we aren't the people in control. I call BS. What are you doing there getting your salary? So let's become who we want to see leading us. Let's start making those connections in our communities. Let's do something. The first step is coming here. Get your friends and family involved. Have them sign the petition. Get them on the website. Get them their memberships. We are in control with the numbers of memberships. On the local levels, I'm just going to touch briefly on this. On the local levels, everything has been infiltrated that I've talked about here tonight. The municipalities are all in on it. They're all in on the COVID money. Every bit of them. Attend your school board meetings. Put your names forward when you see a vacancy. Go to your municipal meetings. Demand accountability. You are privy to every decision made in this province and in your towns. You pay for it. If we don't like what is going on, this is the only way to change it. We need to be involved. It's high time we are part of the decisions. I am done accepting that my son, who's in grade 10 in the public school system in this province, goes to his social studies class, and the aim of the whole course is to discover and define how globalization shapes their identities. Find out what's going on in your schools because you have no idea. No idea. I didn't know, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't know because I thought I did. It starts early. They're starting with grade 1, grade 2, and it's dangerous. I will not stand for it, and I will refuse to be labeled as a right-winged extremist. I just want my son to enjoy a better life than I've had. I'm going to close with a happier story. January 24th, 2022 at 7 a.m. 3 new friends were gearing up for the trip of a lifetime. Just as we were heading out, a truck caught my eye. I had to go check it out before we left. She was big. She was red. She had lots of white lettering all over it. Freedom. She was being driven by an Alberta dad. His kids were sleeping in the bunk. I spent many a night in my dad's bunk and day while he drove. I walked up to this truck. I'm not sure why. We were getting ready to pull out, and I said, Starla, stop the truck. I got to go over and see this guy. We exchanged beautiful words between strangers. I went back to our pickup, and we saw him sporadically from here to Ottawa. The trip to Ottawa changed our lives. Due to our group's commitments, we could only stay about 4 days in Ottawa. We were able to observe the positivity, the love, and the patriotism for just a few days. But this gentleman was there for the long haul. His kids were there for an education, he told me. His kids helped him with TikTok. And his message got out, and the truth emerged for anyone who was open to receiving it. I've been involved and volunteering with the Alberta Prosperity Project for a little while now. This is an old post. They held an event in Caroline last month. We packed the house there. As fate would have it, one of the guest speakers was unable to attend, and Pam asked me to share my story, and I obliged very nervously. Once the event was over, we stayed back and we chatted with everybody, as we'll do tonight. A man approached me and said, I knew you when I saw you on the stage. I met you before in Calgary. Hi, I'm Sandy. As soon as he spoke to me, the vivid image of his red truck came to my mind. This is the latest happening in a string of happenings since the fateful day in October when I lost my job. My heart is just filled with joy, more than one person can handle. You would think that losing my only source of income would have shattered me. Truthfully, some days I still struggle. Today's not one, and I'm thankful for that. And for every friend or family member that I have lost, and there have been a few. On this amazing journey I've gained as Sandy. Here we are. We're still standing strong. And even for the people that don't agree with us, we're standing with them too and for them. The Alberta Prosperity Project has become a beacon of light for me. Hope in a dreary place we find ourselves in. Its leaders have sound policy, rational solutions, and above all, a love for Albertans that has been lost along the way under previous governance and political parties. When I listen to the APP's aspirations for us, I know it and I feel it in my heart. There is only one path forward that I want to follow for this beautiful place I call home. It's an independent Alberta. It is my ambition to become a free, independent, and prosperous Albertan once again, and I do believe it's possible. Come with me. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the courageous Naomi Smart. Our last guest this evening really doesn't need much of an introduction because his reputation precedes him. I've heard him speak on many occasions, and I can tell you that the passion he has for what needs to be made right in this world is contagious, strong, and right on point. He is a courageous defender of the rights and freedoms of his fellow Albertans. He's a very passionate man, standing strong and sacrificing so much for the well-being of his family, his friends, neighbors, as well as for perfect strangers. He also made the trek to Ottawa, where he joined the front lines in the convoy for the freedom to end all mandates. He advocates for truth and freedom everywhere he goes, and he's not afraid to tell it how it is. Each event that he attends builds on the one before. And I can tell you that the last events that he was at with us, the crowd was on their feet in applause before I even got his name out. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta, Chris Scott.
Thanks very much. Wow, Stavely, what an awesome turnout. Good for you. This is great to see. And I actually see some younger faces in the crowd. Hardly any gray and white hair tonight, but lots of shiny heads. Anyway, thank you for taking time on your day to come and hear us speak here today. So it was mentioned that I've made some sacrifices. And I have family time, possibly 2 charges to answer for, some financial hits for sure. But the biggest thing I sacrificed through all of this was actually a blessing. I sacrificed my apathetic, not civically engaged life that I led before. I am probably the most guilty person when it comes to not getting involved and trying to be the change that I wanted to see in the world. I spent most of my time working. I worked in the energy industry, so obviously I worked a lot. And we had ups and downs, and I had a really good life, a great lifestyle. I didn't really want for anything. But because nothing really affected me, I didn't get involved. So I think my decision to put my career in the energy industry on hold and go and buy a restaurant was one of the best things I've ever done. Because it put me in a position where I was really affected by government policy, by poor government policy. I was really affected by poor, horrible, terrible leadership. And I don't even want to call it leadership because what we saw over the last 2 years was not leadership. What we saw were talking points repeated time after time after time. We saw a complete refusal to listen to the people of Alberta. We saw politicians' egos getting in the way of them doing their job. And even worse than that, we saw their fear of sticking their neck out make them failures in their jobs as our representatives. I've had the privilege of talking to a number of MLAs over the last couple of years. And Jason Kenney's not one. But the common theme that I've heard from each and every one of them was, yeah, we knew something was wrong and we knew it shouldn't be like this. We even listened to doctors and scientists telling us that what we're doing was killing people. And yeah, they're probably right. One of them said, not to me, but to somebody I know, well, that's not what I see them saying on TV. Others, a more common response was, I didn't want to stand up and say something and be alone. Wow. Sometimes, in order to do the right thing, you have to stand up and be alone. But when you do the right thing, you're only alone for a moment. And I can tell you that from experience. I opened my restaurant, not knowing what was going to happen. I actually had this vision that the government was going to completely crush me and I would lose everything, just go back to work in the energy industry and make a crap ton of money and not even care that I lost the restaurant. But that's not what happened. I was alone for about an hour. I wasn't even really alone because my staff was right there beside me. My family was with me. My girlfriend supported my decision. So I stood up and I spoke out and I acted out in civil disobedience against the government who was forcing horrible policy on me, something I never thought I would do in my lifetime. I was only alone for an hour. And then people all over the province stood up and they stood with me. And then people from all over Canada. Then the news picked it up and it went international. And people from all over the world were sending me messages and emails and cash in envelopes in the mail. Because they saw me stand up and do what I know was right, even though I may have been alone doing it. But I was never alone. Because all across the globe, there are people just like you who have had enough. They have had enough of watching their futures disintegrate before their eyes due to ideological blunders perpetrated by governments who never suffer the consequences of their own actions. This isn't just an Alberta problem. It's not just a Canada problem. This is a civilization problem. We're circling the toilet. Humanity is circling the toilet. People are desperate for something to hope, to give them hope. They're desperate for something tangible that they can grab onto and save them from that impending drain that they're heading towards. And so we've seen over the last 2.5 years, people have latched onto the weirdest ideas. I stood in a crowd and had somebody tell me, and they meant it, that the lady that was speaking and burning a Canadian flag was the new legitimate Queen of Canada. And all we had to do was support her because she had an army that was going to save us from everything. And they actually believed that. They latched onto that because they were so desperate for hope. Now, what I've heard at every single APP meeting that I've gone to is hope. There is a tangible solution for our problem. It's within reach. It's plausible and it's probable. And the reason it is because folks just like you, all over the province, have had enough and they want something to do. And they're waiting to get involved. They're waiting to stand up and use their voices. Has anybody here heard me speak before?
Oh, yeah.
Does anybody know what I always say is the most powerful force in the universe? Sound, your voice. It is the most powerful force in the universe. The universe was spoken into existence. That's power. Physicists, even secular physicists, there's papers written about how everything in the universe, whether it be energy or matter, comes down to sound. It actually gives legitimacy. Well, I mean, the legitimacy comes from the creator, but in the secular world, it gives legitimacy to the idea of creation spoken into existence, and that's from the secular world. So that's one of the things I try to get across to people is no matter what you think your impact can be and how minimal your voice is powerful. And it's not only powerful doing things like this, standing on a stage with nothing prepared and just speaking from the heart. It's powerful amongst your friends and neighbors, even if you're not speaking about politics or policy or whatever. Your voice has power. And when you speak to people and engage with people, there's always an opportunity to plant little seeds about this problem we have, what the solution is, and how we get there. And that's our job going forward, because there's a lot of people in this room, but there's a lot of people in this province. And in order to achieve the goal that we must achieve, in order for our children to be free in the future, we have to reach a lot of people in Alberta. So that means that every person in this room is critical. Your voice is all important. There is nothing more important right now than your voices. And when you leave this room, I want that to weigh very heavily on your shoulders. This is our job now. If we don't do this, May 2023, it is very likely we won't have the opportunity to do it again. Well, we may. But instead of getting on the path to freedom and prosperity and foregoing this own nothing and be happy that those in authority right now want for us, it'll be our kids suffering so much and being affected so much and watching their children go hungry that they take up arms. Because that's the way things like this go. When things get really, really bad and more people are suffering than not, and people's children are going hungry, it gets ugly, and it gets ugly fast. How many people watched what happened in Venezuela? Now, this isn't a fear tactic. This is fact. Venezuela went from a world-class economy, a beautiful, shining example of a free country, mostly free. In 11 years, they were burning money in the streets and fighting for food, eating their pets. 11 years. That's all it took. Our society and our way of life is much more fragile than you think. And the biggest lie, the biggest mistake that we ever believed as kids was that we live in a free country, we'll always be free. These documents protect us, you have nothing to worry about. My third grade teacher told me that. Her name was Miss Amber. She was a great woman. But thinking back on that, I went through my life thinking that somebody else was going to take care of things for me. I went through my life thinking that my forefathers fought and died for my freedom so that I didn't have to fight. Well, that was a lie. They did that so that we would have the opportunity to keep our freedom. And that means becoming engaged civically, becoming engaged politically. That means even doing fun things like having an event like this, throwing a big party and a barn dance with music and sharing little bits of messages. It can be fun. I mean, this is fun, but barn dances are more fun, right? And the last 2 years, we haven't had that. We haven't had the freedom to peacefully assemble, to have fun, or for political purposes. Relationships have been damaged. Trust has been destroyed. Families torn apart. Friendships ended because of this, because of poor government policy and poor leadership. Recently, I wrote a very long response to somebody's Facebook post about me. And I explained my position on the Premier, on Jason Kenney. So right now in Alberta, there's a group going around and their mission is to replace the Premier with somebody else and fix everything. And honestly, for me, I don't really care if Jason Kenney stays or goes until May next year. For me, replacing the Premier, firing him is more out of vengeance than anything. Because when I was in Ottawa, I listened and I watched what was going on in Alberta. And as the winds of public opinion changed, because of what the truckers did, Jason Kenney changed his position. The winds of public opinion changed. He changed his tune because he thinks that that's how he'll get reelected. So as I thought about this further, I realized it wasn't leadership what he was doing. It was politics. Some of these folks, they just want to get reelected. So they don't stand up and stick their necks out when your life or livelihood is on the line. They just skim under the radar, collect their paycheck, have their rooftop Jameson whiskey, and then try and throw me in jail when I do the same thing. We need leaders. I know 100% that there are some leaders in this room who are going to stand up and who are going to show their communities that there are people that want to be public servants. There are people who want to serve their friends and neighbors and communities for their benefit, not just to get a paycheck. And I know there's a lot of people in this room that's why you're here. You want to become engaged. Those two there, they're really looking at each other, love in their eyes. I think they might already be engaged. So, as you attend these meetings, and as you listen to the speakers, and as you go through the website, www.albertaprosperityproject.com, as you read through the policy, governance, and bylaws, and the platform, as you discover what's being laid out to put us on a path towards freedom, independence, and prosperity, it is important for you to take that information, digest it, and then stand up and be leaders in your own communities. It has to happen. And it will happen. It's already happening all across the province. The most common question I get asked is, well, who do you vote for? What party do you support? And I keep saying, it doesn't matter. When you build a movement like this, no, you don't build a movement. When you capitalize on a movement like this, and you buy your memberships and you donate and you help spread the message, what you're doing is you're channeling the movement that already exists. You're telling people, you're showing people that they're not alone in thinking something needs to change. They're not crazy. We felt, I'm gonna ask this question, I ask this question almost every time I speak. How many people in this room, when COVID, like after the first, 2 or 4 weeks or whatever, how many people in this room looked around and watched the news and thought, geez, something is wrong here. They don't really know what, but something's wrong. How many of you felt alone in thinking that? Look around. Put your hands back up. Really look around. Look at how many people are just like you who thought there was something wrong, who thought they were alone. Now imagine if we build a membership in this group and that membership is 2 or 3 or 4 or 500,000 people. And somebody has this feeling that, hey, something's wrong, we need to make a change. Well, now we belong to a family of like-minded people. And we know we're not alone. And we know our voices are more powerful than any political party. Because when you have a group with a membership of 500,000 people, what do you think those political parties want? They want your support. So if you stand together, because we are stronger together, Trudeau and Singh know that, don't they? If you stand together and you tell these folks who hopefully want to be your servant, this is what we want. We want to be free. We want to be prosperous. We want small government. We want our children to have a future. We want to own our property. We don't want to be taxed to death. If there's 500,000 people strong who are saying that, you will get it because they want the job. You are the parade, and they want to get in front of it. Now, in closing, because I'm getting the eye, very briefly about how this fits within with the idea of the unity we saw across Canada with the convoy. That's a question I get very often. People ask me, how can I advocate for Alberta independence when I talk about the unity that we saw with the people across Canada? Because that's our identity as Canadians. Our identity that Trudeau says we don't have is that when our neighbors and our friends need us, we're there for them. All across Canada, those truckers drove across the country with hardly a plan. And yet everywhere they stopped, there was food, there was shelter, there was clothing, there were fireworks. People were throwing hamburgers in the window of the truck and hitting Carrie in the face. People were there for each other. They stood up for each other, even for something like a convoy protesting mandates. No real plan, just a drop. And the answer to how this fits with the unity we saw across Canada is this. None of those folks want to own nothing and be happy. There is no Alberta Prosperity Project or independence-minded movement in BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or any other province that I know of. They're starting to ask questions. So in Alberta, we're a little bit different. We're a little bit Wild West, right? I see some cowboy hats, lots of knobs. We're a little bit Wild West. We don't like it when people threaten our futures or our children's futures. We're a little more boisterous. We tend to stick our necks out and go to jail for what we believe in, do we not? Every now and then. So I want you to think about this. We not only have an opportunity to save ourselves and be prosperous in this province, but we have the opportunity of a lifetime to stand up and lead by example and show the rest of Canadians who believe in freedom and prosperity that there is a way. When we stand up in Alberta and lead by example, they will follow because they will see an Alberta, a nation of Alberta that is more prosperous and more free than any other place on the planet. And that's what Canada was intended to be in the first place. And it's not the fact that we're in Canada that prevents it. It's the fact that we have a tyrannical government that's subscribed to globalist, elitist policies that want us to own nothing and be happy. And if we show them the way, they will follow. And that's how this fits with the idea of unity across Canada. Unity with our fellow Canadians and getting out from under a tyrannical federal government. Now, if there's anybody out there from any of the other provinces watching, or maybe you're from a different province, I want to tell you this. We are not abandoning you. We are simply showing you how you can do the same thing as we're going to do in Alberta, because we care about you and your future and your children's future as well. Yes, even Quebecers. By the way, they're crazy, but they're awesome. Crazy. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is their spot.
I would just like to point out that the volunteers that put this event on, they got everything together and they've done a bang up job. Can we get a hand for that? So those are our presentations for this evening. So I'm just with that going to leave you with a few closing remarks. Chris wasn't kidding when he said that we need all of you to join us. We need you to leave this event and be excited about taking your freedom and prosperity into your own hands. We need to grow this community, this movement, this growing wave of Albertans who have had enough. We need to grow this people's movement. That's what it is. It's a movement of the people. We've got one chance to secure the future for our grandchildren and our children. We have one chance to gain our freedom and our prosperity, and that is by electing an independence-minded government in 2023. I'm going to try and tell you a little story here. In Medicine Hat, there was 1,200 people there. It was the biggest event that I've been to. And one of my granddaughters was there. She's 8. And at the break, there was a lot of people trying to talk to me and stuff like that. And she snuck around and she tugged on my shirt and she whispered something in my ear. Then she ran back to her seat. And that was fine. The show went on. And then on the way home, she said to me, "Grandma, were all those people trying to become members of the Alberta Prosperity Project?" And I said, "I hope they do." And she said, "I hope they do too, Grandma, because that's how we're going to win." And she's right. So if you think for 1 second that the little kids in your life don't know that there's something great going on here, that there's something great when we get into this building and we have our presentations and we ask the questions and give the answers, you better think again, because they're paying attention and they need you to do this. We need you to do this. We need you to buy memberships. We need you to become chapter leaders. We need you to become volunteers, to create excitement in your communities and bring people together. You could start a prosperity garden or a community garden and share the wealth and the bounty with your friends and neighbors. We need people with vision, ideas, and energy. And we need to show our friends and neighbors that there is hope. We need you to be the change that you want to see in this world. And all of those things that you can think of and so many more. We need you to do those things. We've got good people at this table. We believe in the good of humanity and the good of community and the good of our friends and neighbors. And together we can make a difference. We wish to see the rights and freedoms and dignities of all Albertans restored with accountability of governments, courts, and bureaucracy. Our solution, as Dennis said, with no politicians at our table, is to have 500 to 1 million people. 500,000 to 1 million. He even said 1.5 million today. We need that many people to stand together because that's how we'll make a difference. We're doing something here that's going to be, it's history in the making. It's never been done before. I'm challenging you all to be on the right side of that history. We need to do this for our children and our grandchildren. Let's unite and take back our province, our prosperity, and our freedom. Samuel Adams says, "It does not take a majority to prevail, rather an irate and tireless minority that is keen on setting the bushfires of freedom in the minds of men." Let's go out, let's go and light those fires. Alberta will become a sovereign constitutional republic, one where the First Nations people sit at the table as partners in the creation of a new nation of Alberta. And on that great day, Alberta truly will become united, strong, and free. Thank you very much.